questions to the esteemed panel themselves. But before I begin the session, let me again just ask what is our ending time? Rabavi?
4:30.
Is it 4:30?
Yes, 4:30.
It's 4:30. Okay. So we have about an hour and 10 minutes, that means. Before I begin with our issue at hand, there's one line that I want to say about the last two sessions in general. Because I think that some element of the last two sessions might have felt to some people as being quite technical, where we kind of did deep dives into kind of high school curriculum and you know how teaching and pedagogy works, and in terms of AI and how AI works and so on. And I personally believe that nothing could be more appropriate for a Sephardi gathering than those kinds of discussions, because those kinds of discussions are discussions about how the world works. And if we are not seeing how the world works in its various facets that matter to us, right? And of course, high school education certainly matters to us, and AI should absolutely matter to us. So I just want to say that I think that's a perfect example of I mean, I was inspired to see that, the Hachamim are present, listening, and paying attention. Those are the things that, we need to pay attention to if we're going to understand our world through the lens of Torah. And on that note, through the lens of Torah note, I want to open this session. Because we also spoke this morning about integration, and I have a note with regards to integration that I'd like to share. And that is, my understanding of integration is as follows. There is a frame through which we see the world. All of us have a frame through which we see the world. And it is through that frame that we value everything that we see. We give meaning to everything that we see based on the framework. The framework ideally for Israel is Torah. And Torah is called by the Hachamim a keli Hemdah. Right? It is a keli. It is a vessel. We're talking about tools. It's a keli. And it is through this keli that it is Hemdah, it's precious to us, and through it we see everything. And that's the idea that Hachamim say, hafoch ba, hafoch ba. Go through it over and over. And that to me is the issue of integration, right? Everything that we see should be seen through that lens. And if we see it through that lens, then whatever it is that we're seeing is through the framework of Torah. And that's why Rabbi Hidary earlier, and if I'm wrong about this, please correct me, yesterday said, we don't want Torah u'madah. It's not about Torah and Madah, it's two different things. There's Torah and how we study things through that frame. And if you want to elaborate...
I was citing Rabbi Badi.
Right. And sorry?
I was citing...
You were citing Rabbi Badi. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So, and in that vein, I want to open this panel. This panel is about higher learning. Right? So we've been talking about the various modes and stages of learning. And in this panel, we're going to look at and discuss learning on a higher level, right, for scholarship, right, to become scholars, and ultimately what we would say perhaps for Rabbanut, Semicha. I'm hesitant to use that because what does Rabbanut mean? But let's just use the vernacular, right? So if we're talking about a level of scholarship that we normally would provide a credential to someone and say, we give you Semicha, you've studied enough, in which really what we say technically in this, and this is another thing that I said to the Montefiore graduates, we say technically in this kind of tiudah that we give a Rab, yoreh. And yoreh means you should rule, right? You have the capacity now with your knowledge to be able to rule on law based in the areas in which you studied, right? And where you found your expertise. Now, whether that's exactly how it relate to a rabbi or not is questionable, and I'm interested to hear, from the panel what they might think of that. But ultimately, we're looking now as to what should higher learning look like. What should higher learning look like? And part of that question is, what should a curriculum in a yeshiva for a hacham that we would recognize as a hacham look like? Right? What should that entail? What do we want a hacham to know, ideally? Right? I'm sure we all have very strong opinions about that. I think another question to that is, do we have it? If we do, where is it? If we don't, what does it take to create it? Should we create it? All of those are very significant questions that I'm going to put to the panel and to hear from their different perspectives in terms of how it is they're seeing. And of course, we will do our best to be able to open. With this particular panel, I'm going to ask each of our esteemed panelists to speak for about 10 minutes. I want to give them some time to be able to expound on what they believe, a yeshiva should be, and it doesn't have to necessarily answer that question strictly. I think that their thoughts around this, on this, in whatever way, are extremely significant. I'm also going to ask each of them to first please briefly introduce, and then we'll come to kind of the time to expound and speak. So please, an introduction. Right now, just introduction.
Hi everyone, my name is Shaubi. First of all, I just want to say thank you for Avi, for Ethan, for inviting me. I'm from Jerusalem. I am finishing my doctorate at Hebrew University in Arabic language and literature. I also deal with higher education and post-high school yeshivot. I teach at Eretz, which is a gap year program for mostly Americans, but also not Israelis, but Europeans also, and some other places. Also a number of Sephardim from the Hidary community and others that also come to the Yeshiva. And also I deal with higher education with Israelis in various capacities as well.
Ricky Hidary. I teach at Stern College. I've taken over some of the courses that Rabbi Abadi used to teach on Sephardic Halacha and Minhagim. And I remember you once said, who attends your courses? And you said, it's mostly Sephardiot and some Ashkenaziot who want to marry Sephardiot. Sephardim. So I have the honor of teaching there, as well as in Revel Graduate School, Talmud at YU. And in addition, I have a congregation in Brooklyn founded by Rabbi Moshe Shama, and I'm honored to continue in that legacy.
Hello everyone, my name is Ofer Livnat from Israel. I teach in the Eretz Hemdah Institute in Yerushalayim. Eretz Hemdah is mainly a Dayanut Kollel, and I'm mostly involved in programs that we have outside of Israel. One of the main ones is with the Montefiore Endowment of London, so I travel monthly to London to teach there, Smicha and Dayanut. And there I also work on the Sephardi Bacon, so I have the honor of working with Rabbi Dweck. And besides that, we have other programs as well for Rabbanim in other countries, including here in America.
Thank you. Thank you for those introductions. I think I'd like to begin with you, Rabbi Hidary, and your thoughts around this subject, this question.
Okay, thank you. I'm humbled in this presence to talk about this subject. We started yesterday talking about Ta'amim, Mikra, and certainly that's the foundation, and then Tanakh. And even as we continue our studies throughout our whole lives, we have to always keep that as fresh in our minds. And also Jewish philosophy and Jewish history, really broad education. So there's so many things. And music, we've talked about yesterday. Nevertheless, even with all that, the foundation of a Semicha program is going to be not only study of Gemara, but the study of Halacha, but also the study of Gemara. So I'm going to focus on that because that's what I write about the most. And when the study of Gemara is not necessarily practical for Halacha, there's a sense that we all share that the study of Gemara, even at the theoretical level, somehow forms us. It's foundational. We are in touch with the Chachamim in the raw data. And you see how things develop. You see how things are argued. So that when a halakha question comes up, you know in the back of your mind that there are three other opinions that we don't follow, but still they inform your vision for what Yahadut should be, and it plays a huge role in so many ways. So thinking about the Shitat HaLimud for Gemara, and there seems to be a Sephardic approach, but ask everybody in the room, everybody will describe it differently. Because Shitat HaLimud was different in every country and in every era. So I'm not going to describe all the Shitat, but just one. And I want to present this through two storylines. the first storyline is going to focus on the text of the Talmud and making sure to get the best version of the text. And so, a scene, I'm imagining Rambam, who he wrote a Sefer Torah, and when he wrote a Sefer Torah, he had to get the best manuscript of the Tanakh anywhere. We know it now as the Keter, but back then it was not yet in Aram Sova. And so he made sure to write his halachot based on that best manuscript. And so too, when he was writing Mishneh Torah, in one section of Halachot Malveh V'Loveh, he says, the Geonim have ruled a certain way. I have researched ancient versions of the text in Egypt, a portion of an ancient text of Talmud written on thick parchment, as was the custom approximately 500 years before the present era, came to my possession, and it has a different text than what the Geonim knew, and therefore I decided the halacha based on that. Harambam, in addition to being the expert in all of Jewish history and halacha and the doctor and everything else, he's also an expert in codicology, because he recognized that to get it right, to get the tradition right, and eventually the halacha right, means that you have to have the best text. And this 500-year-old copy of the Gemara that he had, that would go back to something in the 700s, is probably the first time, the earliest written copy of the Gemara ever. So it's just astounding. Rambam rarely gives his sources, but here he says, you have to know that this is my source. Jump ahead a few hundred years. Hacham Abdallah Somech, in Baghdad, he got a copy of Dikdukei Soferim, and he was astounded. He describes it, this rabbi, he's still alive in Ashkenaz, he goes to the Bavarian State Library in Munich, and he found there a great find, a manuscript of the Babylonian Talmud from 1390. There are many sugyot that are difficult, but according to the reading in that manuscript, they can be explained with ease. He's not an academic Talmud scholar at a university. He's writing Teshuvot. He's leading his community, but he recognizes the importance of this work. And then to close off the story, to bring it to one example today of many, Professor David Sabato recognizes the value of the Yemenite contribution. We heard from Rabbi Rasson Arusi, and one of the many contributions of the Yemenite community are their manuscripts. And so how important is it that someone from our own community took the time to study, research, show how that manuscript of Masechet Sanhedrin is superior to all others, and how it opens up our understanding of the Gemara in case after case, daf after daf. So this is one vignette of a few examples from throughout the centuries of people that recognize the importance of checking the text. I asked some years ago a Rosh Yeshiva at YU, not Rabbi Ben, how come they don't spend time looking at manuscripts? He says, well, it takes too much time. You got to go and get the copy and try to learn how to read it. I learned the Rishonim, and the Rishonim, they quote various manuscripts, and I could figure it out from there. It's an okay answer. But today, with technology, with Hachigar Sinan, it takes 1 minute to go and check all the manuscripts, less time than it would take to find the page in a printed Gemara. And so that excuse of it takes too much time, and the amount of time it can save by figuring out, the Rambam had a different manuscript, that's how he got to this halacha, it saves tremendous of time of pilpulim that we can overpass, knowing that this was the text. That's storyline number one. Second storyline, the last one, is about the layers of the Mishnah and of the Talmud. If I ask you a series of questions, how was the Mishnah written? Did the men of the Great Assembly begin to write it, and each one added generation after generation? If so, how come all the names in the Mishnah, almost all of them, are the students of Rabbi Akiva? We don't have so many traditions from the earlier sages. So was it not written and composed until the last generation? Okay, this sounds like the syllabus of my Revel course, but actually it's from Igeret Rav Shirida Gaon. The learned community in Kairouan asked the Gaon these questions, and he responded with what is still the most important essay on that topic. It was important to that community of learners, and it was important to the Gaon to address these matters, because it makes a huge difference in what the understanding of the Mishnah, understanding of the layers of the Gemara. And that has a practical effect, again, back to Harambam. In many cases where Harambam gives a Pesach halacha according to the literal words of an Amorah, and he seems to ignore the Shakla V'Tarya of the Sugya afterwards. The Shakla V'Tarya gives a certain ukimta, gives a certain interpretation of the words of the Moraim, and Rambam skips over it. And everybody wonders, what did he do? How did he get this halacha? Rambam addresses it himself in Teshuvah, and he says, Al Kushezo, Amarti, Lo naniach Talmud aruch v'nifsok halacha mimasa umatan shel Gemara. Rambam recognized that the Pesak halacha of an Amorah, that stands alone. And you have to separate between the Amorah's own words and other words that are added in as a gloss, or the Shakla V'Tarya, which is meant to be a possibility. Right? Here's a contradiction, here's a few possibilities. One could say this, one could say that, but that's not necessarily, and even the last line of the Gemara is not necessarily what the Amorah said. And so this is very deep thinking about how the Talmud was put together. What is it? And he says later on in Teshuvah, Al kol panim lo midivre masa umatan nifsok halacha kemo shebe'arnu. So understanding what the Talmud is, it's not a book of logic, but rather a book of argumentation. And to bring it down to modern Chacham Fa'ur says that one will fail to find in the Talmud formal and analytic proofs, proceeding as with the scholastics from syllogisms accompanied by axioms, premises, and conclusions. Rather, the Talmud is full of demonstrative, persuasive. These are some things that are not necessary but reasonable, to try to reason this way and that way and come up with the best solution that can encompass all of the sources and the needs of the community in each generation. So understanding the genre of the Talmud and what the rabbis, why they were doing it, that was essential to Rav Shina Gaon. It was essential to Rambam and modern scholars. I find in these examples that what comes to be known today as academic Talmud, which is different from Yeshiva Talmud, actually in the Sephardic tradition, these are not two separate things, but fully integrated. And therefore, a question that we should follow is not what a particular sage in some Sephardic land did in a certain age, but what would Rambam do today if he were alive with the tools that we have? What would Rav Shina Gaon do today? And I think that if they were alive today, based on their methodology, they would take full advantage of course, all the Rishonim, the Acharonim, but also some of the modern tools. I mentioned two of them, but we can add also literary readings of stories and Gemara, bringing together, integrating halacha and agadah. And I think that the Talmud is still a closed book. It's still a book that has hidden secrets waiting to be uncovered in a similar way that the Tanakh in the past few decades, through more modern applications of literary readings, has revealed more and more layers as a continued prophecy that we all benefit from and teach. So too, the Gemara is waiting for people like those in this room who have the background and have the skills to not siphon off and be just dry academic, and not only what was done in certain yeshivot in Europe and so on, but rather to bring these together, all the wisdom of the past together with the technology and methodologies of what we have now, in order to bring out a full appreciation of the Talmud.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Avery. Thank you. We asked Dayan Livnat also. I know that Dayan Livnat is partial to Dayanut, and I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on that aspect of Limud and where that is today, and maybe what we need in terms of developing that.
Okay, thank you. So I'll speak a little bit about the study of Dayanut, and maybe refer a little bit to what Rabbi Hidary just spoke about, the importance of the study of the Gemara. So just a little bit of background of the programs I'm involved in. So in Eretz Hemdah in Yerushalayim, we do what's called a full Dayanut studies. It's 8 years, 5 years all of Choshen Mishpat, 3 years all of Even Ezer, and you get tested by the tests of the Rabbanut Rashit of Israel, the Yadin of Rabbanut Rashit. So it's a very intensive 8 years, and even then you're sort of left breathless with very little time for family, or even to say Psukei de Zimra. Sometimes you don't have time. It's very it's quite intense. We started a good few years ago also, we were asked to start also Yadin programs for rabbis in Chutz La'aretz, because there isn't that much Dayanut programs, at least as far as I'm aware of, outside of Israel. Israel, you have the Livnat Toshit, you have quite a few places that do it nowadays. And we said, Tafasta merubero tafasta, if we will try to do like we're doing in Israel, we won't get very far. So we started a part-time program, more limited on the most needed subjects of Ibn Ezer, because you always need people who are able to be Mesader Gitin, and also to deal with questions of Ishut, of Yuchasim, of Kuna, and those issues. So we started a part-time Yadin program for rabbis in Chutz La'aretz. The way we did it was every week we would send source pages. There would be a weekly shiur by Zoom. Even before COVID, we were using Zoom, and plus we would have every so often in-person meetings. So, for example, we have a group in London where I come to London monthly. So we meet every month. And for rabbis in America, we would do a yearly seminar. We just had one in Miami. That's why I happen to be in America for that. For the seminar, and Baruch Hashem, we managed to complete a few cycles of that. We even have here in the room Rabbi Verdugo, one of the graduates of this program. And why did we do all of this? And from here, I'll get a little bit into the methods of learning. So I would say three primary reasons. First of all, there is a need for dayanim. Okay, in Europe, it's actually a little bit better, because in Europe, if you're a dayan, you get a lot of kavod. They call you dayan, something, and there's a lot of honor in being in America. Even if you're a dayan, you're still just a rabbi. It's not very lucrative. It's not very lucrative to be a dayan. I see also a lot of the people that are involved in it. They're really doing it l'shem shamayim. So there is a need for dayanim. There is a need for more people who will be able to be mesader gitin, to deal with all the various issues, the unpleasantness that you have to deal with. So that's one part of it. The second part is that we wanted to have programs for rabbis that could learn, because as I'm sure everybody, oftentimes rabbis don't have time for their own self-growth. They're so busy with the community work. Where's their time to learn? They're busy preparing shiurim, preparing sermons. Where's their time for their own learning, for self-development? So that was another goal of the program. That's really, I see why a lot of rabbis, they join the program, because they want to have time for learning and to advance themselves. And the third is also to really try to help rabbis and to raise the level of Torah scholarship that we have. And if a rabbi has a halakhic question, to make him more equipped to be able to answer it properly and thoroughly, rather than him, just calling another rabbi who was a posek, or asking on the WhatsApp group of rabbis or something like that, to try to really, to deal with the halakhic question himself, and to research it properly. Now, what does that mean? So here I'll put a little bit of my 2 cents on the value of studying Gemara, and I'll mention something interesting. One of the, I think, brilliant things that the Rabbanut Rashid does in Israel. And they do this on the Dayanut test. The Rabbanut test of the Rabbanut Rashid, they're completely closed book. The Dayanut test, on the other hand, they're not completely closed book. They allow you to bring in a shas, a Gemara with Nishonim, the regular shas, not one of the fancy ones like we have nowadays with Shulchan Aruch and everything inside, the classical Gemara with Rif, that they allow you to bring into the tests. Why do they do that? First of all, you can imagine if they have 3 tests on Choshen Mishpat. Choshen Mishpat is 427 simanim. So you divide that into 3, it's not exactly an equal division. So one test has 74 simanim, another test has 100, and 110, another test has 250 simanim in one test. Even Ezer, they do one test, that's 178 simanim. How is anybody supposed to remember that? I have a few friends that have this, photographic memory. They remember everything cold, but most people are not like that. So what's the idea? The idea is you have a halakhic question. You start, you're supposed to know anyway. I think this is the message they're trying to say. Where in the Gemara does this come from? Okay, so they ask you a question, let's say Hilchot Gitin. Okay, Hilchot Gitin. I have an idea of what's going on in Masechet Gitin. Where this is a sugya that would appear in the first chapter would appear in the second chapter, I can look it up, I can find the source. Once I found the source in the Gemara, I can look up the Rif, the Rosh, Shiltei Giborim. There are a lot of sources there, okay? And from that, even if I don't remember everything, I can already develop a good part of the answer to the question. To me, that's something very fundamental, because that really expresses how the learning of halakha should be. Because it seems to me that sometimes, like you were maybe hinting to a little bit in your words, there are yeshivot that focus on one type of learning, they focus on Gemara, they focus on certain types of Rishonim, and then they jump all the way to late Achronim, like Reb Chaim, Ol Sameach, and those kinds. It's one type of learning which sort of skips everything that happened in between, the Beit Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, and the commentators. Then you have other places, or it could be in the same places, the same yeshivot. Once they switch to learning halakha, they forget everything they did earlier, and now they're just learning Shulchan Aruch and the Farshim, and they forget about all the effort they earlier put into the study of the Gemara. And the message here is really very powerful. The way to properly study halakha is to get the full development of the picture. You start with the Gemara, you start with the basics, even the Girsai in the Gemara, which is very fundamental as we know. Start with the Gemara. From there, you're able to trace your footsteps in chronological order. Rif, Rambam, Ran, Rosh, Tosfot, all the different opinions. The major opinions. You don't have to go to every far-fetched opinion that you can find in the Rishonim. It's nice if you're able to do that, but at least to have the main opinions. From there, you come to Beit Yosef, who's supposed to be at that point just a nice summary of everything you've studied so far. And then you can understand the Shulchan Aruch, commentators, and from that also come to contemporary posting on contemporary issues as well. And now you have a real proper, deep understanding of the entire halakhic process from beginning to end. And if we're speaking about yeshivot, I think that's one of the subjects Rabbi Dweck mentioned. So
it's the subject.
The subject. So I would say there is this value in sort of the studying which is done a lot of times in the formative years in yeshivot, where we're really just teaching people how to learn. So we're not so much about teaching knowledge and everything, we're just trying to get them how to think, to get some textual skills as well and some analytical skills, but we have to also somehow draw them to that big picture of learning halakha properly, and again, in full development, so that, when you have a halakhic question, you can point, this is a source in the Gemara, this is what the Rishonim debate, this is what was ruled, and if I have a contemporary ruling of Rav Ovadia Yosef or Moshe Feinstein, whatever it is, I'm able to show how they came to it and understand the whole process that they did in reaching the ruling halakha. To me, that's something I think very, very important in the learning in yeshiva.
Thank you very much. So I hear, yes. So not to minimize, just as a recap, right? I hear Rabbi Hidary, stressing how we study Talmud and what a derech, what he seems to be an appropriate and valuable substantive derech in terms of how it is we study Talmud. And Livnat not talking about obviously rooting in Talmud, and ultimately how are we studying halakha substantively and substantially. So on that, I kept you at last on purpose. Rav Eli Shaubi, he wrote a white paper on a vision for Yeshiva, post-high school Yeshiva. But post-high school, I think that's a bit loose, although we hope to bring people in at that time. We've discussed it, went over the white paper together. You all have it in your folders, so don't look at it now. But Aureli's going to give an overview, kind of, on what the vision is for what a yeshiva might be. And I asked the question at the opening: do we have the yeshiva? This is an assumption that we still have yet to create something, right? We want to create something. So please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say, the white paper was not written just by me and the team of friends and colleagues in Israel that I work with through the Israel branch of the Chabura. A lot of the vision of creating the Israel branch of the Chabura 4 or 5 years ago was with creating a team of teachers and organizers in mind. And I hope maybe something can come to fruition from that. Like Rabbi Dweck said, it's still a vision and a thought experiment, but I think that there's a real gap and a need. And when I say that, I want to emphasize very, very strongly that there's a gap and a need both from the diaspora Jewry, but very, very much so also from Israeli Sephardic Jewry. And I say that because we've had this amazing conference where we're talking about the future of Sephardic education that dealt mostly with diaspora Jewry. But the majority of the Sephardic world is in Israel, and they lack institutions very much in many ways that we do in creating future Talmidei Chachamim and rabbis and dayanim and all and future leaders of our communities. And I think that there's a very big gap that needs to be filled. And I'm sitting here and I'm presenting my experience, but it's not just my experience, it's the whole team behind me. And when I think about Sephardim, in Israel, because Sephardim in America, I think all of you know and know very well. When I think about Sephardim in Israel, and I have a zechut to live in Yerushalayim, and it's also a zechut to be with you guys because sometimes living in Yerushalayim, I feel a little bit divorced and disconnected from what's happening in the communities here. And it's nice to hear about all the amazing things that are happening here and what all you are doing for Am Yisrael. And when I think about Sephardim in Israel, it really comes in two different ways. About this feeling of this gap of connection with their Sephardic identity. It comes also from those Sephardim who are a little bit less connected or less knowledgeable. Whether they're Talmud Softi or more knowledgeable than that, it could be anywhere on that range. And there's a very, very big thirst for reconnecting with their Sephardic heritage, a very, very big thirst. And I see that in numerous programs that have sprouted over the last 5 years, 10 years, to fill that thirst amongst that group of Sephardim. And they don't know what the Sephardic tradition is. They're looking for it, and they don't know how to find it. There's a lot of these people. And then also from the more educated, people who have gone to Yeshivot, who studied, who know how to study Talmud, who are very, very educated in Torah, and go through a lot of the Yeshivot and the Yeshiva system that exists in Israel, and find that they're not learning about their Chachamim, their Minhagim, their traditions. And I say this not voicing my opinion because I grew up in America, but from the people on my team who went to Yeshiva in various places and feel that this is something that's missing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this thought experiment that Avi asked me to talk about. I'm not going to go through the whole white paper. You're welcome to, you can read it now also. I don't know. Now, after, whatever you want. But I'm not going to go through all of it. I want to touch on a few pillars that I think are very, very important of what this kind of a yeshiva should look like for creating future Talmidei Chachamim and leaders, laymen leaders, for our communities and for the state of Israel. I'm emphasizing again both aspects of what could be a dual program of Anglo and Israelis. The first element that I think that is fundamental for the way our study should look is a very, very strong focus on bekiut, and bekiut on the foundational texts of Jewish tradition. And that means, first of all, the Mikra. The Mikra is the heart of our nation, and I think we spoke about that a lot throughout this conference, and it can't be emphasized enough. It needs to be at the heart of all of our study, and a deep bekiut in knowing how to recite all of Mikra with Te'amim, of knowing how to be a Ba'al Qiriyah, and these are things that our yeshivot, post-high school yeshivot should be emphasizing, and and training in doing this in self-study. In general, when I'm talking about Bekiut, I think this should be in self-study, with guidance, of course, from rabbis. But I think there needs to be a strong emphasis on self-study together with the iyun that will come with teachers. The second is Mishnah. Bekiut in Mishnah as a precursor to study Talmud. We don't just jump straight to the Talmud and do iyun in the Talmud if you don't first have a solid foundation in Mishnah. And I think this should be, it needs to be in two ways. One, the specific Mishnah, of course, that's being studied, the specific Masechet that's being studied in the Yeshiva. I think people need to know the whole Mishnah, if not by heart, very, very well, before continuing to studying Talmud, and also being encouraged to study the whole Seder of that Mishnah throughout the year. They should know that Seder very, very well. And a Bekiut program, aside from just what they're doing in Iyun, of studying Mishnah more generally. This is a hallmark of any Talmid Chachamim. He needs to know the Mikra, he needs to know the Mishnah. These are foundational texts, and not immediately jumping into Talmud. The third foundational text is Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah is the halacha pesuka that summarizes the halacha of the Talmud. It is the beginning of studying halacha. On top of studying the Mishneh Torah, then studying Bet Yosef, going back to Sugyot, looking at Shulchan Aruch, looking at the Mefarshim, relevant to Shuvot that a teacher should bring. But before doing all of that iyun, the person needs to have a solid knowledge of the halacha pesuka, of the Mishneh Torah, because that is what gives them a broad understanding of what the halacha is, and without confusion, with clarity, without sugyot, without de'ot, without all these things, something that's clear. And then on top of that, building the whole pillar of the dialogue of the various poskim and the various rishonim and the various mefarshim that Maran brings, and later. Those are, I think, the three pillars of Bekiut: Mikra, Mishnah, Mishneh Torah. Mikra as its own foundation of everything, Mishnah as the precursor to Talmud, and Mishneh Torah as the precursor to Halacha through Maran. That's one. Two, a second component I think that is critical of what a yeshiva like this should look like is not just about acquiring knowledge, but becoming men of good character, of developing good people with good midot, with good habits, and that can be future leaders of Am Yisrael. And when I say future leaders, the first aspect of that is that they need to be engaged in the sugyot and the issues that are facing Am Yisrael today. That means judicial reform. That means state and religion and state. That means free market economy versus a welfare state. That means all of these, the rise of anti-Semitism, all these issues that are facing both the state of Israel and the Galut. They need to be engaged with these issues, because these are the issues that Am Yisrael is facing, and they need to be aware and engage with what's going on. This also encourages a view of themselves as not being just merely part of a certain community, but a part of all of Am Yisrael, right? They're not part of the Dati Leumi community. They're not a part of some Haredi community. They're not a part of the Syrian community. They're a part of Am Yisrael, and they need to be engaged with what all of Am Yisrael is engaged in. Of course, they have their own communities as well, but they need to be engaged with all of Am Yisrael. And this goes into the second pillar, the second aspect of leadership and good character. And this is Zionist ideals. They need to be a pillar of the yeshiva. And that means military service for the Israelis, and Americans, of course, not military service, but their peers are going to be serving in the military, and they should be engaged in learning about Israel, learning about the land of Israel, learning about the Knesset, learning about all these different things. They should be learning about these things to become future leaders and educated, both rabbinic and non-rabbinic. Another aspect of men of good character, this means also giving them tools to do de'ot, tikkun midot, not even necessarily rabbinic. It could be people who deal with therapy in general, and giving them tools of journaling or whatever it is. These are ideas, right? How it comes out practically needs to be thought, but giving them tools on working on their midot and becoming good men, and also giving them good habits, like doing I spoke a lot about that with Rabbi Dweck, and encouraging that. Every day they should be reading the Aliyah with Targum after Shacharit, let's say, and then on Fridays reading again the whole parasha. These are habits that they should be inculcating within themselves while they're in Yeshiva and carrying with them for the rest of their lives. They should be doing this every single week. Okay, that's the second pillar. And the third and last pillar that I'm going to talk about is strengthening their Sephardic identity. And when I talk about strengthening their Sephardic identity, this is complex because there are many Sephardim. There's Moroccans, there's Assyrians, there's Yemenites, there's Egyptians, there's North Africans, there's many different types of Sephardim. And I think that it is imperative that these various communities be brought into dialogue together. There are many bubbles, especially in Israel, but also out. Moroccans who are Hasidim of Rav Sherki, Yemenites who are Hasidim of Mori Gafer, Assyrians who are Hasidim of their Chachamim, and they don't talk to each other. And this is a huge shame because the Yemenites have a lot to learn from the Syrians, and the Moroccans can teach a lot to the Yemenites. And it's very important that these communities be brought in dialogue together. In fact, this is one of the very big things I try to do with the Israeli branch of the Chabura, to bring a diversity of Sephardi voices into the conversation, because they have a lot to learn from each other. And simultaneously, when they learn about their differences, they also learn about their commonalities. Because both the Dawda'i and the Igashi, Kabbalist and the Maimonidean of the Yemenites, both of them knew how to read the Torah exactly, right? And this is not it's not a question of am I Maimonidean, am I a Kabbalist? Everyone knows to read the Torah, and I think Mori Gafer exemplified this best when he came to Israel. When he was in Yemen, he was part of this mahloket in Teiman. When he comes to Israel, he left the mahloket completely aside. And people asked him, why don't you voice your opinion? You just voiced it before. He says, no, that was a mahloket שהייתה שייכת לאדמת תימן, בארץ ישראל היא לא שייכת. Because in Eretz Israel, we're fighting on preserving our tradition at the very core, right? And while it's important to bring the diverse voices as well, it's important to maintain the commonalities that all of us share, because those are the pillars of our tradition. And the other voices are important because they enrich the dialogue, but they are not the foundation. And it's easy to confuse them. Let me see. The last 2 points that I want to make, and then I'll finish because I'm getting a bit in. Is that it is important, I think, for our teachers to familiarize our students with the intellectual and literary history of later Sephardim, of the various books that we might not be studying as much in other yeshivot, to become familiar with what our Chachamim did. And lastly, the art of the derasha. The art of the derasha is the primary medium through which we communicated with our audiences, with our kehilot, as much to their heart as to their intellect. and knowing how to incorporate the oratory beauty of incorporating pesukim, of incorporating rabbinic idioms, all the beauty that is in the derasha. This is something that students should be taught. Maybe once a week, have a sample student give a derasha, and they should prepare it and with help from a rabbi. And this is also to strengthen their Sephardic identity. I think there's momentum. I think there's a lot of desire, both in Israel and in the diaspora. I think that now is a critical time. I think there's really a lot of momentum, and I hope that there's boots on the ground that can make it real.
Thank you very much. Before I open up to the audience for comments and questions, what is the time frame of a typical student would you expect to have to spend in this study, to complete the study?
So I think it differs between the Americans and the Israelis. Israelis were doing Hemdah, or doing or Tochnik Shiluv, where they're doing full military service. They're still typically, many of them, doing 3, 4, 5 years in Yeshiva, and that's usually not what the Americans do, and that's fine. I think there's room for both. One, of course, creates Talmidei Chachamim a bit better than the other one, but both are important. I think also for the Israelis who end up staying 4 or 5 years, they should be encouraged to be simultaneously engaging in some sort of academic or non-Jewish study or non-Torah study as well, to encourage general knowledge and wisdom and chokmot and sciences and humanities is important. And I think especially in the Bekiut foundation, different people come with different backgrounds. Different people come. Some people know more. Some people know less. Putting it as self-study, just that self-study program could be 10 years. None of us, to know the whole Mikra, the whole Mishnah, and the whole Mishnah Torah, it can take 10, 15, 20 years. So I think having a set curriculum, encouraging them what to study, I think, and having it valuing finishing things. Because if you study a Masechet and it takes you 2 years to finish, or 3 years to finish a Masechet, you'll never continue. You will continue. You won't finish. Right? There's so much to study, and you can finish it. Right? Our Talmidei Chachamim, once upon a time, knew a lot, and they know a lot because they finished something and they continued on to something else. You don't have to stay forever on the same sugya for in a whole Chorech Zman finish 6 dapim of Gemara, right? And I think this is very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the audience?
בעברית. ידוע שאחד שקיבץ באחד רבנות, שאל את הרב שלו איזה חלק בשולחן ערוך אני צריך להיות יותר מומחה, וידוע, הוא אמר לו החלק החמישי. זה ה-common sense, איך להבין את הקשר הזה. אני תמיד דואג על זה, מלמדים את החלק החמישי. אבל זה, אני חושב שלרב בחוץ לארץ, הכי חשוב זה להבין שלא לכל אחד אפשר להגיד אותה תשובה, זאת אומרת, כשיש דבר יותר חשוב, מה יותר חשוב וזה. סתם, נשאל, אני תמיד, היה לי את ה... לא יודע אם מתעסקים בזה.
Anybody wants to answer? I mean, I think that it's just to not that he's repeating, but just to repeat. Rav Toval's question. I mean, what I hear Rav Toval asking essentially is, look, we can have as much information, but there's a really big question about how to implement information. What is the dot? Right? I think we talked about, whether that's part of the curriculum. I don't know if that's part of what you're talking about in terms of building the human and the midot and so on and so forth. But
Should I answer Hebrew or English?
English will understand.
English, okay. No, certainly. I think that is the role of the teachers, to inculcate within their students a certain culture, right? A certain understanding of who the people are. We had a class in the Habura, Chezi Cohen, who taught about the Tafkid Arav בעולם מסורתי בעיני הבן איש חי. He brought a few teshuvot of Chacham Yosef Chaim. My grandfather was always makbid, don't call him the Ben Ish Chai, call him Chacham Yosef Chaim. I'm half Yemenite, but also half Iraqi, so. Although that also, my grandfather said, don't say Iraqi, say you're Bavli. The word of Bavli. And he has a teshuvah about Mechalel Shabbat Befaresia that wants to say Kaddish. And what do? Can you answer? Can you not answer? Can you allow him to say Kaddish? Can you not? Does it count for Minyan? Does it not count for Minyan? And there's a halakha pesuka that's pretty simple. And to do that is lahik many Jews from Beit Knesset. And that's not what we want. And so he instituted, okay, so whenever there's Kaddish, Shaliach Tzibur also says Kaddish at the same time as everyone else. In my Iraqi synagogue in Ramat Gan, where my grandparents grew up, whenever it's Kaddish, even it's Hati Kaddish, I don't know why also Hati Kaddish, there's like 15 people saying Kaddish at the same time. Right? Right. That's the Ben Ish Chai. And this is the Chokhmah of the Sephardi, right? Knowing how to not answer just the halakha pesuka, right? That's what Rambam is for, the halakha pesuka. But the halakha l'maaseh, you need to know a little bit, also more de'ot, and also some common sense, like you're saying.
I would like to add to the study of Gemara that you were mentioning about Hidary, and I think it has to do also with the idea of the yeshiva. It might take me a couple of minutes.
We have 15 minutes, so just...
Look, there is also a Sephardic way to study Gemara. Now, I haven't read about it and seen this in many institutions, but I think it is a real and tangible system. I think the first one that spoke about it or wrote about it is Rabbi Yitzchak Panton, Darchei Talmud, and I think that Chacham Faur is the one that reformulated it. With your permission, I just want to mention it, because I think it's essential for the future of Sephardic education. And as perhaps one of the main contributions of the Sephardic world to the general world of studying Torah. So as you said, the first is to get the right text. Then the Solatah Shma'ata, which is the analysis and the reading again 7 times, as Rakam Paton says, until you get the structure, not only the Pisuk, the understanding, you struggle with the text, you get the structure of the Sugya, which is so important to think Talmudically. Then you have to go to the terminology. It's not the same Taneh, Tanya, Tenur Rabbanan, and Tena, and you have to emphasize the terminology of the Sugya. It's so important because the editor assumes that you understand what you are saying. Then you have to go to the protagonist. Not only if he's from Eretz Israel and from Babel, but also if it's the Rab, the Talmid, if it's from Surah, from Medita. All these contexts have so much importance in the understanding of the Sugya that we are talking about. And then you have to ideally use Mishneh Torah as the most perfect perush of the Gemara. Okay? We are living in a world where the text is a pretext. It's just a pretext for the commentaries and from the Rishonim and for the Haronim, etc. I think that we need to look. The rabbi from OU was saying, if I would start over my career as a rabbi again, I think that if I say this to myself, I think that I would have gone, systematically through this system and teach Gemara and study Gemara in that way. I did it once with the tapes of my uncle of Abraham Faur. I taught Perek en Obedim Litpalel. It's a completely different world. And I hope that, it's part of the thinking also of this yeshiva to bring back the Sephardic way of studying Gemara. It makes a big difference in the whole apparatus and understanding of the Sephardic way. That's sorry that I took a little more time, but I thought I had to speak about that. Thank you.
Rabbi Hidary?
I agree 100%. Sometimes there's a long way that's a short way. And it may seem like, we have to add also this and also the terminology and where they came from in the biographies. But it's true, that adds a few more steps. But then once you have those steps, then everything else goes smoothly. So I agree 100%. The long way, the real long way, just thinking about everything you said, you're going to be left with nobody. Who could rise up to such a level? And 2 points about that. First, we need very talented people to have common sense and all this. We need the top talent, not to be going to Meta AI and Google. Right? That's the third level they can go. They can't handle the yeshiva. All right, so they'll settle for getting a job there. But we need our top talent to be doing this because this is the most essential, and the community has to support that. But in addition, I'm not sure if the same curriculum that worked in medieval times, when a person could be an ish eshkoliyot and know everything, it doesn't work today. There's too much to know, and we live in an era of specialization. And you're not going to go to a hand doctor to work on your foot with the right hand to the left hand because he went to school for 20 years to do surgery specifically on this and not that. And that wasn't true back then. And I think it's just impossible. It's too much to ask. And you're going to scare everybody away. But there's going to be people that are going to be experts in Tanakh, and experts in high school and education, and experts in Dayanut, and experts in philosophy. Because to be at the top of your game, you have to put in, the years and years in being that expert in Jewish philosophy. And you can't ask a person to be doing too much. And luckily we have the communication and that we can rely on each other's skills when we need that. And I think that collaboration, it will be even more essential.
Very important point. Response, I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
First of all, thank you. I think that in large part, a lot of this is a thought experiment. And the second we go into details in the Ma'asi, there's going to be a lot that you're going to have to give up on and figure out and make it real. It's good to have the ideal in mind because then you have what to strive for. And also, when you come to reality, to know how to juggle the ideal with reality. I think that's so it's important to get all this feedback and etc. I think that you can't create a Talmid Chachamim from the age of 18. He has to be created from the age of 3, 4, 5. And there's work to be done on all of these levels, like we were discussing this whole conference, and people are doing excellent work on all of these levels. And ultimately, you need to create a communication between the various schools and all of the levels, so that they have a coordinated curriculum from the age of 3 to the age of Dayanut, in order to really create a Talmid Chachamim. That being said, on the way to get there, each stage needs to work on what its stage can do. At the age of 18, they're not going to do Rak Shinun Mikra like the age of 5 should, and it's not right to do that. They're more intellectually developed. They need to be doing more higher capacity things, and you need to know how to juggle these things. And I think a lot of it is also creating educated laymen who value these things, so then they know to send their kids and to tell their kids to be doing these things. And I can say this, לשבח של as teaching in Yeshiva Eretz, I have many students, some of whom are Sephardi, some of whom are Ashkenazi, and the schools of the Sephardic communities, I see that the Sephardic boys, many of them, are coming with much stronger skills than their Ashkenazi peers. I also see, if I want to talk to them about the importance about getting bekiut and knowing how to read with ta'amim. With the Ashkenazim, many times I have to convince them why it's important. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And the Sephardim, it's tiv'i, they understand. A lot of times also people who didn't grow up with that, the Sephardim understand better. That's interesting. I have some theories of why. But that's l'shevach, the high schools and the middle schools and the elementary schools that are working on these kids from before they come to the yeshiva age. So I think having the ideal and working towards it on whatever capacity, they don't need to end their 1 year in yeshiva or their 5 years in yeshiva and be bekiim and all these things. But if they come out bekiim and knowing how even to be a baal kriya only for Sefer Shemot, that's also amazing, right? And they have the rest of their lives to work on, for Bereshit and Vayikra and etc., and to know it's Talmud Torah is a never-ending process, and you want to create in them good habits, a good direction, and that they know what the goals are. Not necessarily that they accomplish them while they're there.
We have 10 minutes left. I have 2 more questions that I'm going to take. The questions need to be 2 minutes or less.
Thank you very much. Very, very, very short. First, I want to say that unfortunately here in the United States, less in Israel, but here, the boys, they think that Gemara belongs to Ashkenazim, and the Sephardim only have the Halacha. Okay? So, and about being involved in boys and teaching also in Yeshiva, Sephardi Yeshiva, we opened a Sephardi Yeshiva. I learned the Peruda, very similar to Kisra Chavim in Israel, the same way of learning. And there's no such a thing of Iyun P'kiyut, because we learn Iyun in a Sephardi way, and we finish the entire Masechet. Iyun means, the way Chacham Beit Tzela Bashar learned, Chavei Chacham Ovadia, Rabbi Zaratia, the teacher, that's the way they learn. And I think if we walk that way, if we really teach our children and we teach them about the books that we're learning. So Chacham said, we wanna make them Chacham Sephardi in the future and so on. I would say very simple. I would say something very simple. If you want to be a Chacham Sephardi, open the Sephardi books. Mishmorot Keuna, Chachmei Tunis, Pituchei Chotam, Bardugo. From Egypt, also you have Shaubi, you have now Mitzrayim. Open those books, learn those books, form your mind as a Chacham Sephardi, and learn those books, and you will see Mishmorot Keuna, for instance, is parallel to Rabbi Akiva here. But the Ashkenazim will not help us discover this wonderful book. We need to discover this book, and we set up this book of Mishmorot Keuna. So I'm saying that's a way of the majority of Chacham Sephardim learn. Make it very, very short. The second point I want to make is the pronunciation. Sometimes I go to the Sephardi show, and I hear Chacham Sephardi speaking like Ashkenazi. Okay, like Rav Sheshet instead of Rav Sheshet, Abaye. Those things are very important that we also want to teach our children. And if we be very proud of ourselves and show and teach our children and teach our students about those books, there's many books. There's like hundreds of books, right? Every single Masechet, Marsha, of course, Rashash, that's the way everyone learns. And I think that will eventually develop a true Talmidei Chacham Sephardi in the future that will form their mind to become Sephardi and also how to learn Beit Yosef, because they're learning in Shitat Ayun the way the Chachamim learn. That's a short comment.
אני רציתי לשאול מה דעתכם על ללמד היסטוריה בהיסטוריה של עם ישראל ושל הנצרות והאסלאם כדי להבין את המרחב התרבותי שהיהדות מתפתחת וגם לזהות אולי השפעות זרות שלא שייכות ליהדות המקורית ואולי אפשר ככה להשיב בתשובה את התורה עצמה איך שאנחנו חיים אותה. מה דעתכם על זה?
So, Rabbi Hidary, if you want to respond to Rabbi Cohen first point.
Sure, thank you. I had the privilege of spending some years studying Mishmerat Kehuna with Rabbi
Together.
We did it together, and Rabbi Harold Sutton. And I gained tremendously from those skills, those textual skills and thinking skills. However, it's just interesting to historically see Rambam, his approach, and then you have Ramban, who, yes, he's Sephardi, but he's in the north, and his approach is much more similar to that of Tosafot. And then you have the Mishmerot Kehuna, and I would say about 80% of your time is studying Rashi and Tosafot. So you're calling that a Sephardi method, and it is a Sephardi method in the sense that there were Sephardim in Tunis that were studying that method, but I feel that it takes away from the focus on the text of the Talmud itself. That's my experience, but of course, every approach has its value.
With our version of the Mishmerot Kehuna, 80% of our time was just trying to figure out what the word actually says on the page because we couldn't read it. And with Rav Saka, any response to Rav Saka's question about the historical frame?
I would say also specialization. In order for someone to really say something intelligent about Christianity and Judaism, you have to delve in and read the church fathers. I have one of my close friends, Michal Barasher Sigal, in Ben Gurion University, has written several books about this, and she's a world expert on Christianity and on Talmud. To do that, you have to spend years studying that. You can't also finish Chosh Mishpat and also do that. So we're going to rely on those scholars who we trust, who are doing a good job, and then we can use the results of their scholarship and present, and that could be very useful in our shiurim as side points. I think what we really need is a new edition of the Talmud that brings in all of these insights from everywhere that they are, so that someone who's studying doesn't have to know that in some obscure journal somebody wrote about this 50 years ago, but that is present and available to the student, and we have the ability to do such a thing. So that's my hope and dream.
Thank you so much.
Just to add on that, I think there are a lot of opportunities, even when we're teaching even a core subject like what I try to teach. You can add a lot of things inside. Like, just to give an example of, I recently gave some shiurim on issues of fertility, which are modern day issues. But a lot of the discussions start from a certain tshuva from Rabbeinu Peretz and Rishonim. So I sent also a picture of the manuscript where that's found, because it's not found in any standard manuscript that you would expect. So try to enter some, how things develop and how we're found. Or if you're talking about the historical context, I also sent an article that somebody wrote, very interesting, comparative of Christian literature at the times of Rishonim about conception not through a form of regular relation. So I'm saying even everything that we're learning, even though our main subject we might be learning halakha or gemara, whatever it is, we have a lot of opportunities along the way to throw in, this information, if we want historical information about the Amoraim, Kitveyad, whatever it is, the historical background, whatever it is, we try to find along the way a lot of places where you can plug in these things. I think that can be very beneficial.
Eli, 3 minutes.
I think if we're going to what Rabbi Hidary said about it's too much information, right? You need to let some time of what the ikar is and what's tafid. And the ikar, also going to Rabbi Biton was talking about, right? Knowing how to parse a sugya, knowing how to read it correctly, correct intonation, repetition, and key terminology, figures, and halakha pesukah that comes out of it, knowing kilalei Talmud and applying it, that's already a ton. And I think that, like in any yeshiva, there's always time for self-study, that the students can pick whatever they want. And this is going to Rabbi Saka's comment about studying various things in Machshava. A student can, in his own time, can study whatever he wants. There's the Bikiyut program that he needs to do, and if he manages to find time to add on to that his own things, Ashar. But you need to focus on the ikar and not get lost in the tafid. And I think that Machshava in general should be put in. I don't want to say tafid because it's very, very important, but it's primarily from teachers. It's not from an 18, 19-year-old is not ready to study Moreh Nevuchim. But he can be in a class where a teacher gives a perek of Moreh Nevuchim and is introducing him to certain ideas and certain concepts. Maybe a student in his 4th, 5th year, maybe a student after college who decides to come. That's something else. You can have a small hamura with a rabbi and a few students. That's something else. But the ikara, that's
Thank you so much. I really want to thank our esteemed Hachamim in this panel for a rich discussion. We have one? Now you're telling me we have 15 more minutes. All right, do you want to continue discussion?
Do you want to continue discussion?
Yeah, this sounds like there's
Seems
questions.
like there's questions.
Are you okay to continue? Okay.
Hazak Baruch to all the esteemed panelists, and really this whole day, the past 2 days have been incredibly illuminating, and as Rabbi Dweck mentioned, kind of alleviating a certain element of loneliness that some of us may have or have had till now. Rabbi Shaubi, when you started laying out this plan for this theoretical potential yeshiva, I got a little bit emotional because I remember when I was about 18 years old, I was on the phone with you. It was about my first year of yeshiva, and I was kind of displeased with the curriculum, with the level, with the type of learning, with what we were focused on. And I was telling one day I wish this kind of yeshiva where they study all this bekiut and this type of gemara that Rabbi Biton mentioned would be out there. So I really hope, Azat Shem, I don't know what the timeline is on this. If there's a timeline on this thought experiment, that would be amazing to see it in the near future. And I have a little follow-up more on the demographic that this yeshiva is going to be hitting. Because growing up in Israel, which I assume would be a majority of a certain portion of the students come to this yeshiva, there were many non-ethnically Sephardim that were lost because they just never were exposed to this shitat limud, which is maybe perhaps a more traditional form of limud, which is relevant to the modern day Jew more than other shitot. And I'm wondering how this yeshiva would manage to bring in these kind of students from other backgrounds, and how it would manage to integrate itself into the greater Israeli society, which I think in the end would have the bigger impact on Am Yisrael, which we all want to have. Thank you again.
I think that's a very, very important point, that the Sephardic tradition, we call it maybe the Sephardic tradition, but really it's a tradition for all of Am Yisrael. All of Am Yisrael, it's not just ours. That being said, you need to raise the voice of this tradition, and it's most natural to start with your natural allies and people who kind of understand what you're talking about, and then you can expand. But I think, of course, Ashkenazim should be invited. And it's also a big question how you would brand the yeshiva. You brand it as a Sephardic yeshiva. You brand it as just a yeshiva that has tradition, and it's a question. It's a big question.
You could do 30% Ashkenazim.
The truth is, I'll say, I teach at Eretz. My first year I was there, I had only Halabim come to me. We had like 6-7 Halabim in my Chavura. As the year went on, about 3-4 Ashkenazim happened to, because at the beginning, this is only for Sephardim. And slowly they started coming. And then my second year, so people already knew me a little bit. I had more Ashkenazim than Sephardim in my second year. So it's doable. It's not. I don't think it's but yeah, it's a question of branding. You have to think about it. It's something that needs to be given a lot of thought. I don't have an answer.
I want to say two things about that. First of all, my experience is I don't think that it needs to be branded in Sephardi or Ashkenazi particularly. I think that we can say, look, the source, the strength of this Masoret is found predominantly, amongst, the Sephardim, whatever the broad meaning of that term is. But as you say, my experience also, so many of the people who learn from me or do learn from me, they want to learn Torah, and they find that there's a certain derech of Torah that is meaningful and speaks to them. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, I do want to kind of come back in a summarizing point, because I'm listening to what the Hachamim have said and some of the questions. There is, it's like you say, tafasta merubeo tafasta, all of that. There seems to be that there is a basic proficiency that we seek from our Hachamim. There's a proficiency. We want our Talmidei Hachamim to be able to read Torah appropriately, to be able to read Torah accurately, to be able to know what it means in its basic sense. I think everybody can agree to that. That's what you want a Talmidei Hacham in the most basic sense to be able to do. You want a Talmidei Hacham to be able to know one's way around the Talmud. How to navigate a sugya. How is it that I'm meant to be able to engage, at least in the basic level, how to read and deal with the sugya. We want the Talmidei Hacham to be able to know the path towards halakha pisuka and where the origins of halakha are and how appropriately it should develop. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. That's proficiency, and even those things we have a chisaron with today, right? I think that if we were able to get that, right, just a basic talmid, to be able to come out with those things, it's a tremendous development, right? To be able to have a broad cohort of talmidim being able to come out with those things in a strong way, right? Being able to firmly know it and be able to teach it, that's huge. And then I think that Rabbi Hidary's point is, not that he needs me to say it, but it's such an important point, because it is true. Once that's the case, you need specialization. There's going to be people that spend a huge amount of their focus on the moreh and the philosophical elements of Torah and how it is that we apply that to our lives today and how to communicate those ideas. There are going to be people that are going to delve into the Girsaot of the Talmud and how to be able to teach Talmud and write on that and develop that. There are going to be people that are going to be focusing on specific subjects in halakha for their entire career. That's also true, right? So I think that there, one is not exclusive of the other, but it helps to be able to go on the frame. Rav Tobal wanted to ask that.
אני רוצה לשאלה ששאל הרב סקר. אני רוצה להגיד עצה ומ-experience. אני מסכים מאוד עם מה שאמרתם, אפשר להכיל את הכל. יש עיקר וטפל, אבל בתור עצה, כדאי לרב קהילה, שידע לפחות קצת, זאת אומרת, לקרוא, לא צריך להיות מומחה, לא באסלאם, אבל שידע מה חושב פרויד, זאת אומרת, העיקרון, מה האסלאם וזה, זאת אומרת, לקרוא קצת, יש הבדל עצום, כשמדברים עם הרב, מדברים על איזה נושא, והוא לא יודע בכלל מה זה, באמת זה נותן תדמית לגמרי שונה. אולי אנשים בקהילה שלי חושבים שאני למדתי באוניברסיטה הרבה זה, לא, אבל אני קראתי הרבה על כל נושא, וגם על פוליטיקה ועל מה שקורה, אז אני יכול לדבר על כל נושא, וזה נותן רושם, וזה משנה את הכל. לא צריך להיות מומחה בכל, בגלל שזה בלתי אפשרי, יש עיקר וטפל, כמו שאמרתם, צריך ללמוד את העיקר, אבל קצת לדעת באמת מכל נושא, ולדעת על מה מדברים. ואם לא, זה ממש נותן רושם שהרב הוא...
General education. General education. Or the front table.
Well, I have an actual question for you. I have this sense that there is something very characteristic of the Sephardic way of learning that maybe is lacking nowadays. That it's the capability of synthesizing. Meaning that if you seek all over the poskim and the mefarshim from Sephardic tradition, you will see since the Rif that there was this actual shita of making things synthesized, and then the Rambam, and then even the Shulchan Aruch, and then at some point it started to change over. Like we have to make things complicated. And I have this feeling that I don't know when we started to
show the world that we, Sephardim, were also able to do that. Like it was something. So I have this feeling, if you share with me this idea, and if it will be advisable to do that again. Because what I realized, you spoke about the idea that the Sephardim were more related to the Halacha, because we are more related to reality, to facts, to actual work, and not only to reading and studying just for the sake of studying, even though it's a mitzvah. But yes, in your opinion, it is advisable to return to that idea of teaching children and teaching people in youth in Yeshiva to summarize. After you have finished your learning, just please summarize, and then I guess they will be able to remember more. And if, in your opinion, this is an actual way of Sephardic studying, or maybe I'm having a mistake.
Regarding the last point of remembering material, and this I can say on my own study. When I was at 18, we had so many sugyot that I don't remember at all the sugyot because they went so far into the sugyot. I don't remember so much. I think, especially on Beki'ut, I think incorporating exams. And I don't know, I don't think this is traditional or not, but it doesn't have to be traditional. You can incorporate modern educational tools as well. I think having exams that is a very important part of encouraging review and then remembering. I also think we have going back to the conversation that on the high school panel that they spoke about, that the problem with grades is that if you give a low grade, then they don't get into college or they don't get a job. We don't have that problem, so so it can be more real, right? And it's lishma, right? There's no meaning to the grade other than this is an assessment of what you know. Do with it whatever you want. I think incorporating tools like that for a review.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's a problem of an echo chamber. If you have a yeshiva, but it happens in academia also, when people are only talking to a small group of 4 or 5 others and just writing for each other and not engaging with real people in the world, then they end up just looping and not saying anything that makes sense. One of my things I like to do, if I read an article or I can think of an idea, I want to sell it at an academic conference, make sure my academic colleagues know it, but I also want to teach it to a group of businessmen. Because if the businessmen don't know what you're talking about, then it means it doesn't really make sense. It can make sense to really smart people because you're saying certain keywords and lingo, but it doesn't make sense on the ground, then it's not really a good idea. And so I agree wholeheartedly that if someone is only in yeshiva their whole life, within these 4 walls, and not talking to real people, not engaging in the world, then it spirals into pilpul. But if someone is learning, but also making it practical, then it has to make sense, and that's a good test.
Yeah, I'll just add what you said. I think it's a very important point. I recently studied the issue of Sefer Torah she'nimtza ta'ut. If you're in the middle of learning, you find the ta'ut in Sefer Torah. So somebody put out a whole book on the subject. So for Ashkenazim, he has there an 8x8 chart, close to 60 cases of all the possibilities of what can happen and what you're supposed to do. For Sephardim, no chart, 1 line. You always do the same thing. Okay, very, very pashut, very straightforward. I think there's a valuable truth in that. But even when it comes to learning, and there are complicated subjects, one of the things I learned from one of my Rabbanim, the Yeshiva, he said that at the end, after all the Etvahev, the Sufa, and all the Shana B'Talia, you have to have a clear idea at the end that you can summarize in 60 seconds, 2 minutes at the most. So you give a whole hour-long shiur krari, but at the end you should be able to summarize it, something clear that somebody can take away, 2 minutes, not more than that, and that's something fundamental to learning. And then, but Hidary said that shows if we understood, if we have clarity, if we understood it, we can repeat it clearly, succinctly, and remember it hopefully as well.
So
I'm going to test you on what he said.
So when I was the dean of the Sephardic Institute of Sephardic Studies at YU, I prepared a whole curriculum for the undergraduate and the graduate school, including the rabbinic school, based mostly in incorporating all what you mentioned about how we're going to get there. But really, that yeshiva program cannot start post high school. It has to start at age 3. By the time the student graduate high school, 12th grade, the student has to be baki in Tanakh, has to be baki in Mishnah also, has to be baki in the principles of learning the Talmud, and has to be baki in Midot and in Musar. Now, it doesn't mean that they have read all the books on Midot, all the books on Musar, but at least that they have to know, because those are the formative years for students after high school, right, after grade 12, in Yeshiva Gedolah. They're going to start to learn now Midot, is already too late. So the only thing you're left is the actual text that they're going to be learning in the Gemara, the Sugyot, the Halachot, the Mishnah, and so on and so forth, Mishnah Torah. So that program has to start, it has to be all encompassing and all comprehensive from the beginning of Bet Sefer, even before Bet Sefer, from age 3, early childhood, all the way to that semicha of Yoreh and Yatin Yatin. That way, you could certainly shorten the years, and the accomplishments are not over just the years post high school, that includes the 12 years of elementary and high school.
Last question.
Thank you. I don't know if it'll culminate in a question, I think.
Well, we're out of time.
Okay, then I'll keep it short. I'm not a rabbi, as many of you who know me, but teach Sephardic studies and Sephardiyut, and of course in this room with a lot of you who I cherish for your viewpoint. So I'm thinking about what, as a community member, as somebody who actually works with a lot of different corners of Am Yisrael, if you will, and beyond, to talk about and teach Sephardiyut, what do I need from the Rabbanut? What do I need from the Yeshiva to prepare, the rabbis of today in the Sephardic heritage or milieu? So that's one thing I'm thinking about, and I know that you're touching on it, and that's not necessarily certain specializations, but preparing the rabbis of how to engage with the world, and I think Rabbi Owen mentioned something along those lines, that practicality as well. So one of the things that I think is bubbling in my head a lot is, and we're talking about it in a lot of other ways in terms of Torah learning, is just the importance of words and text and so forth, but also for us to be thinking about terminology. We have such an opportunity in this particular moment, and you mentioned it in your quote of Hacham Fa'ur, where he's really talking about the essence of the rabbinic enterprise. In each time was the last 3 words of the quote that you made. In each time. And what does Am Yisrael need in this time? I think we have a great opportunity to bring the Sephardic heritage culturally to so much of Am Yisrael, if we can actually get outside of some of the terminology that actually holds back engagement. So practically speaking, we're literally sitting in the offices of the Orthodox Union, a term that I bristle at because a lot of my people that engage with me, students and people of all different levels of observance and backgrounds, that is not where we come from. We're the big tent. We're, the Sephardi umbrella is everybody's welcome. And so I think it's important, I guess my culminating question is, how do we parlay this framework of this classical Sephardi heritage within what we're teaching in the Yeshiva, in order that the Rabbanut also represents this more historical or approach to the enterprise of rabbinics, so that it can be and have a major effect on Am Yisrael. Legamre.
We're 3 minutes over, so I think if you have a 2-minute answer, we can do that, because I'm saying we'll go to 4:50.
Well, I'm going to ask Rabbi Hidary
okay.
if I have a
Rabbi
choice,
Hidary,
because he's here in America.
I think we have a responsibility to all of Am Yisrael, and as you said, and that means to the millions of Jews in America who are not so engaged. And perhaps they are not so engaged because when they do turn on the television or something, or depictions of what a rabbi is, it doesn't speak to them. And I do think that the Moreshet Sepharad and its rationalism and engagement with the world should and can speak to a modern person much more directly and give them that ethical and spiritual foundation that they need. So that's up to us to reach out beyond our own synagogues and schools and to think about how can we cross bridges to American Jewry as a whole. And hopefully, it's not, I think it was, Sina said yesterday that we didn't call it the Chabura, not the Sephardi Chabura, but just the Chabura. And so branding, I know the OU is starting an app that's not going to be called Orthodox because they want to reach out. So I think that we have that opportunity and responsibility to be the voice, the future voice of Am Yisrael in America and in Israel as well.